Hello, Mr. Wallace's class. I'm Josh Revels, and I'm the Education Outreach Specialist at Katherine Johnson's NASA IV&V Education Resource Center, which is located in Fairmont, West Virginia. And today we're going to talk about different views of the skies, and hopefully you can find some of this information as some inspiration for your art projects and also just entertaining. And so previously in a video, I talked about spring constellations that were visible at this time and gave you some star hopping techniques to help you find it. So I'll just review those star hopping techniques. And so they all start with Ursa Major, or an asterism within the constellation Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper, which is really easy for folks to find in the northern part of the sky. And if you take a look at these stars, Alioth, Miser, and Alkaid, that kind of make this arc or handle-like shape on the Big Dipper, you can follow that arc down to the next brightest star in the sky, which is known as Arcturus. And Arcturus is part of the constellation Boötes. And Boötes is a very common spring constellation. Many cultures in the past have seen this constellation as a sign of spring's arrival. It was time to do things that you would do in spring whenever he appeared above the horizon. And then from Arcturus, if you spike straight down instead of arcing this time, you end up at another bright star in the sky named Spica. And so those techniques help you find some of these constellations. And the names of these constellations, the Virgo, Boötes, Ursa Major, all of these are from Greek origins, right? So we look at the sky with a lot of Greek stories and Greek myths, and I'm going to explain to you why that is. So think about Greek life. Greeks were advanced, especially for their time period. They had an advanced form of government, which they called city-states, and that led to the first democracy of really big powers to be in their region. And so what it was like living there, well, boys were the only ones to go to school, and they had to be in a wealthy family to attend that school, and they would often travel to that school and be away from home for a long period of time. There also was some advances in military power. There were alliances between the different city-states of the Greek civilization, and this led to them, pairing up and conquering different parts of that, problem that was going on at the time, with having the ability to, use advanced military tactics that other places weren't coordinated enough to do. And so philosophers were a thing, and they contributed to many current modern thoughts and modern science that still we see today as observable phenomenon. And then also this was a time for creation of poetry and literature, and they often performed these things in the theater, which was really an advanced thing. Art and agriculture was also an example for other groups around them. Their buildings, as you can see in this photo, were just fantastic. And two of the most concerning things for our presentation today are mathematics and astronomy. And so the Greeks were really developed in terms of creating mathematics and using it to do things. And so they actually developed the basics of geometry, and they like to apply their geometry in a field of science called, or field of mathematics, sorry, called trigonometry, into astronomy. And so astronomy to them was a higher form of mathematics, and it often related to their philosophies about how the gods would bring, how the gods existed, and how getting to know those gods through astronomy was a way to get closer to them. And so, as I mentioned, the Greeks were very knowledgeable in math and geometry. In fact, they were able to take their understanding of shapes, like circles and triangles, and combine them with experiments to actually generate the math that we call trigonometry. And they even created this instrument here that was actually, this is the first instrument that was really used to study space, and it's called an astrolabe. And so you can see it's got a circular design. And so it was used to track the moon and the sun's motion in the sky. And Greeks saw this circle as kind of like the perfect shape. Circles have no sides, they have no points. There's really no flaws in a circle in their mindset. And so anything that was a circle or any circular shape was seen as a holy shape. And it was kind of really deeply rooted in their belief system about the views of the sky as well. And so their views of the universe was that the earth was in the center and that the heavens were this huge sphere that wrapped around the earth, which we call the celestial sphere. And so the sphere was hollow, and at the edge of the sphere was a matrix that held all of the stars in their perfect place. And then that this sphere would then kind of rotate around the earth, and that's what made the stars move in the sky. And Erastosthenes is a Greek who actually conducted an experiment measuring shadows cast by two monuments in the cities of Syene and Alexandria. Actually, in Syene, it was a well that the light went into. And he basically measured the lengths of shadows to kind of figure out what the distance was between these cities, and knowing at that time in his mind that the earth had to be a round spherical object because it was created by the gods, that he could then calculate how round the earth actually was, what the distance was all the way around this sphere. And so even at that time, he was able to calculate, with only being off by a few thousand kilometers, the true distance around the earth with this very simple experiment. And so many other Greeks were also interested in the workings of the universe, and this led to star observations and creating catalogs of bright stars. We also used the astrolabe to basically create calendars to predict when lunar and solar eclipses would occur. And so even though the Greek view of the universe has been kind of disproven, by modern evidence and observations, it's interesting to think how they viewed the planets. And so they actually saw planets as being free from that matrix of the celestial sphere. And so this is because when they viewed them in the nighttime sky, their position relative to other stars seemed to change, whereas the stars were in a fixed position and rotated periodically and routinely, and the planets weren't always in the same place in the celestial sphere. And so I'm going to model that for you in Stellarium and show you what the Greeks were observing and how they came about with that mindset. Make it a little bit darker. So if I move over to the western horizon, you'll see tonight, just as the sun goes down, Venus becomes visible. And so from Earth, these planets look just like stars when we look up at them. The light that's reflecting off of these planets comes from the sun, and they do just look like pinpoints in the sky, but they're most notably seen just after the sun goes down or just as the sun comes up, because all the other stars are not really visible in the sky at that time, because it's still too bright for those very distant objects that are emitting their own light to be seen. And so planet hunting is best done at sunset or sunrise. And so you can see Venus tonight directly kind of above the sun just a bit after it's setting. And it's very bright. It's our brightest object in our nighttime sky because Venus is so close to the Earth, and its albedo is really favorable for reflecting light from the sun. And so it makes it appear like a very, very bright star. And you might even have probably made a wish on this object before, thinking that it was the first star that appears at night, but it's actually not a star at all. And so it wasn't actually until many thousands of years later that Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler studied the positions of planets in detail and determined their elliptical orbits around the sun. And so for the very first time, the globe began seeing the universe as heliocentric rather than geocentric, which is what the Greeks often thought. And so the Greeks would see Venus in the sky, and then as the days passed, notice I'm keeping this at the same time. So the same time of day, they would observe Venus, and they would see that Venus looked like it was in a different position every day at the same hour. But of course, we know that that's not the case anymore. And so what we kind of see, I'm going to turn on the orbits to outline this so that you can see exactly how they're drawn. And you'll notice that we've factored in here exactly where Venus's orbit takes place around the sun. So Venus does have a routine pattern in the sky. And you can see that it appears to move, but only because it's orbiting around the sun. Not that it's actually free from a position in the sky that allows it to just move however it wants. And so this was observed, like I said, by Isaac Newton and Johannes Kepler. And they actually observed that all planets have this elliptical orbit around the sun. Planet is a word, when translated from Latin, that means wanderer. And so the Greeks termed these planets as wanderers of the night sky and named them after their gods, who were also free to move about the heavens. And they also used these names as part of their calendar system to honor their gods. And so Sunday, obviously, relating to the sun, Monday relating to the moon, Tuesday for Mars, Wednesday for Mercury. Just quickly, if you probably think of a Spanish or a French word for Tuesday, like Mardi, or for like Mardi Gras, that's exactly where I'm getting the Mars from, right? So these are Latin languages that these translations are coming from. And so Wednesday would be Mercury, Thursday Jupiter, and Friday would be Venus, and Saturday for Saturn. And these were the things that were visible in the nighttime sky. So other planets and things that we can see with telescopes weren't actually, the wanderers that Greeks were referring to whenever they termed the planet what we know as a planet. And that actually we didn't notice any of these other planets until the telescope was invented, that was invented by Galileo during the Renaissance period. And so Galileo used the telescope to observe Venus, actually, and he saw that Venus had phases, much like the moon. And so these phases that he saw could only be possible if the angle of reflected light seen coming from Venus was due to its revolution around the sun rather than the Earth. And so he actually gets some credit for changing our mindset about how the solar system works. Rather than everything orbiting around the Earth, it orbits around the sun. And that was actually a really big problem to overcome. A lot of people had that idea, but no one really had the evidence like Galileo support it by using the telescope. And so I'm just going to kind of zoom in to Venus and show you. And so these were the phases that he observed with this telescope. And so he noticed that this side being illuminated was kind of like the moon's illumination. And as you go through different points in the moon or in Venus's orbit, you'll see that they change, just like the moon's phases change as it orbits the Earth. But the interesting thing is that if Venus were to orbit around Earth, it would never have a phase where it was basically not visible in the sky, or that it would have this kind of crescent phase that I just showed you, because it wouldn't be possible for it to exist as it was revolving around the Earth. It would only be possible if the light source was between Venus and the Earth, rather than Venus being separated from that. Okay, so I'll move back to the horizon a little bit, and I'm going to adjust some settings at the same time. So when we look at the nighttime sky and see constellations and we see stars out at nighttime, we name them with the names of the Greek stories, and that's mainly out of respect for all the work that the Greeks did in basically creating astronomy. And so the International Astronomical Union actually recognizes the Western sky culture as the standard way to view the sky internationally for scientific purposes. And so This leaves us with the names of constellations that are associated with those Greek myths. And so, like I mentioned, Western culture has 88 different areas of the sky, or 88 different constellations. And each of these boundaries were determined by the International Astronomical Union. And so you might be wondering why these bears, though, according to the Western sky, have such long tails. And so the answer to that resides in a Greek myth of Callisto and her son Arcas. Zeus fell in love with a mortal woman and skilled huntress named Callisto, and she had a son named Arcas. And so Zeus's wife Callisto, Zeus's wife Hera actually was very jealous, and she cast a spell on Callisto and turned her into a bear. And so, hidden away in a forest, Callisto was kind of watching her son grow up as a human. And one day, out on the hunt in that same forest, Arcas met with a huge bear. And frightened by this great bear charging at Arcas and not knowing that it was his mother, Arcas pulled an arrow on his bow to protect himself. So overseeing this impending tragedy was Zeus, and he knew that he was unable to break the spell on Callisto. And so instead, he turned Arcas into a smaller bear and then grabbed both bears by the tails, swung them around with his godlike strength, causing their tails to stretch, and hurled them into the sky, where they would be safe and immortal. However, Hera noticed this was happening, and she wanted to get the final word in. And so what she did was she struck them on their way to the sky and moved them to a place in the sky that never sets below the horizon, so that both Callisto and Arcas must endure weariness without rest forever. And so they're both centered up here in the northern hemisphere, and they're circumpolar constellations. And so you'll see here that all these constellations rotate around this center point in the northern part of the sky, the North Star. And so they're always above the horizon, even in the daytime. Okay, let's go back in time a little bit and point to the western part of the sky. Didn't go back in time far enough. Okay, and so here in the west, we see Orion, who's beginning to sit below the horizon tonight. And so this is because Orion first emerges in the fall, and he treks across the sky toward the western part of the sky throughout winter. And so the most recognizable part of the Orion constellation is the asterism known as Orion's belt. So these three bright stars, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, are seen close together in the sky. And Orion is known as the Great Hunter. And so according to Greek myth, Orion, even though not the smartest of intellects, was by far the greatest hunter to exist. And he knew he was a skillful hunter. In fact, many of the other mortals grew tired of hearing Orion brag about his catches that he would make when he was out on the hunt. And as he bragged and bragged and bragged about his capabilities, even the gods on Mount Olympus grew uneasy with him. And especially when Orion claimed to be the god of hunting. And so, in fact, many of the gods wanted to do something to remind Orion that he wasn't a god and just a mortal like the rest of us, or rest of us mortals at least. And so they decided to release a great scorpion one day to go out into the woods and bite the leg of Orion. And so this would be just enough that he would soon recover, but also remember that he was not the invincible god that he thought that he was. And so this plan actually backfired. The bite of the scorpion reacted severely with Orion, and it ended up killing him. And so feeling remorse for this, the gods picked up Orion and placed him in the celestial sphere so that all could honor his great skills as a hunter each year and forever. And to be sure that this would never happen again, they placed the scorpion on the complete opposite end of the sky, the furthest away from Orion as possible. And so before I show you the scorpion, let's just talk briefly about the stars of Orion. So there are three really closely oriented stars. They look like they're close together, even though they're different distances from the Earth. But they do appear close together in our sky, and they're very bright. And so it's very easy to find Orion's belt in the sky at night. And as I remove these aids, you could see that 3 stars like that is very visible. And so if you once you find Venus, you can look just a bit to the south west, and you'll see Orion and Orion's belt there. And so you also see this really bright red star named Betelgeuse, and below Orion's belt is the leg of Orion, which is a bright blue star named Rigel. And so you can find those stars. And this collection of stars that are dim are known as Maesa, which is the head of Orion, and this is Bellatrix, which is the kind of the other shoulder of Orion. And you can kind of see his hunting knife dangling here off of his belt. And then this arc of stars here is kind of like a shield that he would use to help him fight off things in the woods that might be attacking him while he's hunting. Okay, so now we're taking a look at the sky as seen by the Chinese. And the Chinese have a similar view of this constellation, which is really rare to have such similarity to other views. But this is one that does overlap with kind of European belief. And so instead, it's named Shin, and Shin is located in the White Tiger portion of the sky. So the Chinese divided the zodiac constellations along the ecliptic into 4 larger constellations, which they called palaces. And so the Autumn Palace is where the White Tiger lived. The Winter Palace is home to the Black Tortoise, and there's also the Blue Dragon of spring and the Red Bird of summer. And so the full moon passed through this region of the sky during the peak of hunting season, and Shin is the center of a great hunting scene located here and gets the honor of being the Chinese's 21st lunar mansion, one of just 28 other lunar mansions. And so this is an extremely significant constellation. Other bright stars in the Orion constellation surrounding the belt are the generals of Shin's army. And so according to ancient Chinese legend, the 2 emperor's sons, Shaichen and his older brother Ibo, they were constantly feuding with one another. And so in order to resolve this never-ending fight between his sons, the emperor ordered Shaichen to live in Daxia, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, and he was going to go there and be responsible for all the sacrifices to Shin at that lunar mansion, while Ibo was separated to Shenghe, and he would be responsible for the sacrifices to the Heart Mansion. And so if we move over to the other part of the sky, and I gotta fast forward time just a little bit because Shin and the Heart are on complete opposite sides of the sky, just like Orion and the Scorpion. And so here it is. It just emerged above the horizon. So this bright red star here, which is in the constellation Scorpius, is seen by the Chinese as the Heart constellation. And it would serve kind of to Greeks as the heart of the Scorpion. And so I'll just kind of blend the Chinese and the Greek sky together. And you can see how that pictures. So there's Scorpion coming up above the horizon in the east, completely opposite of Orion or Shin. Now, Native Americans had a very different view of the sky. So just taking a look around quickly, you'll see that not a lot of constellations, but the constellations that are outlined all relate to Native American culture and their stories. And so their entire spiritual belief relies on the stars and the stories that they shared with one another during councils. And so first, I'm going to just kind of read this kind of creation story by the Native Americans, because it explains why they view the sky the way that they do. So first, there was only darkness over everything. It filled all of space. It covered the whole world. The ancient Sun Father, dwelling in the great outer spaces, gazed around with his all-seeing eyes and saw that all was covered with water. So he rubbed his hands together, and from the skin that flaked off, he formed two great balls. Raising one arm high, he flung one of the balls into the water. It melted slowly and spread far and wide and grew bigger and bigger. And as it grew, part of it sank into the water and became Mother Earth. Then he threw the second ball into the water. That too spread all over, growing even larger than the first. It drew up all the water that was left by the first ball, and it became Father Sky. So there is water on Mother Earth and water in Father Sky, and that is why the sky is blue. Time went on, and Mother Earth gave birth to the man and creatures. One day, Mother Earth and Father Sky held a great council. How will our children live? Said Mother Earth. We must have food for our children. How will they be guided? And so Father Sky answered, they will be guided by my hands when I am not near. Behold, he spread out his great hands, palms downward, and there was golden yellow corn kernels in every line and wrinkle on his palms and fingers. The shining kernels will tell him what to do and how to live. They will be their guiding stars. And so we can see here that the revolving male and revolving female constellations, which refer to the first man and first woman, are imagined circling around the North Pole, which to the Native Americans was this great campfire in the sky. And so they always said that if you were lost from your tribe and needed to get back home, all that you needed to do was look for the great campfire in the sky. Okay. So as we move to the west, you'll see there are some other Native American-like constellations. And here we have, again, the three stars. And that constellation to the Native Americans is known as the first slim one, or they affectionately called him Long Sash. And so Long Sash led his people westward to a new land, away from their enemies who were attacking villages, stealing animals, and killing families. And so once settled in this new land in the west, people began to quarrel and fight among themselves. And Long Sash declared, you are hurting yourselves worse than your enemies hurt you. If you are to come to a place of your own, there can be no violence among you. You must decide whether you will follow me or take another trail. And so this leads the culture to kind of see the first Slim One constellation as a time to contemplate and think and make decisions. And so these are just some samples of different views of the sky. And I know that Stellarium doesn't do the best in showing pictures of what those constellations might look like, other than just outlining how they look to the stars. So I did find a few photos for you all. And so this is Bootes as seen by the Greeks. This is one artist rendition of it. And so here it's a little bit different because this artist has linked Bootes to the dogs that are close by in the sky. Not all stories are connecting these particular constellations together. And so these are kind of seen as his hunting dogs in this particular myth about Bootes. And so here are some more Greek depictions of constellations, Orion and Scorpius. And then this is just the Chinese view of the entire sky. And so they divided those sky into those 4 sections based on the 4 seasons. So the blue dragon of spring, the red bird of summer, the white tiger of fall, and then the black tortoise of winter, which is often also associated with that snake. They go together. And so I like that photo, and I also really like this view of the 4 beasts because it accurately shows where they exist in the sky. And so these are their palaces. Okay, and so there are some great references here in the presentation that I'm sharing with you guys. So if you want to go there and read more and get some inspiration for something that you might be working on, just make sure that you cite it like I have, and also check to make sure you can use it before making some of your creations. Okay, and so thank you guys for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed this and learned something. And so I look forward to seeing what you create and can share with me.